Okay, Boker Tov, good morning. Today's daf is Pei Gimel 83. We peek up in the middle of Pei Beta Macbeth, and we're in the middle of discussing this issue here that if somebody buys 3 trees, they get the land directly underneath, they get the land between them, and presumably measured from the overhang, and they get the amount to stand outside of the overhang, and for a guy to pick, which is the phrase of Kimlo Ora V'Salo. And the question is, and the Gemara compared this to the Rabbi Akiva discussion about getting a path to the trees. And basically the Gemara said that this would be true according to Rabbi Akiva, the same way you would not just get the trees, you get access to them, you also get access to picking from them. So the point is, well, then you don't own this path to the tree, you just have a right of ingress, a right of access. So here too, do you own the area outside, or do you just have a right to stand there and pick it? And the Gemara's question is, who gets to plant the area that's directly outside of the trees, where you or your worker has a right to stand and pick from the trees? So that's the Gemara's question. So let's pick up from there. So
the language of Ora V'Salo, Ora,
the Rashbam says, is the word used for picking from
right?
from a fig tree.
Fig tree, right?
And Salo is his basket.
Right.
The picker in his basket.
Verbs of harvesting a specific.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Amalei Abaye, line starts with the word Abaye. It's about 13 lines or so before the lines get wide. Line starts with the word Abaye. Amalei Abaye Rav Yosef. So Abaye said to Rav Yosef, Osan Ora V'Salo, Mizor'an. That space, who has a right to plant it? Amalei Tanitua. We taught it in a Mishnah, or we convert from what we taught in Mishnah. Excuse me. Okay. Hachitzan Zorea et Haderech. So the Gemara talks about the fact about some people, basically, you have a garden inside of your friend's garden, and this is the Pnimi, and this is the Chitzon, right? And here's the road. So you have a right of access to get into your garden, okay? So it's not a case of a sale. It's just a case that that's the way it worked out. It's not exactly clear how did it happen to work out that way. Anyway, but it says you have a right of access. So it says, fine, you have a right of access, but the guy who owns the outer garden, he's got the right to plant. Okay, you can walk over his plants or whatever. Okay, but fundamentally, this is still his yard. So he says the same is true here. Fundamentally, this belongs to the Baal Hasadeh, not to the guy who has the trees. So the owner of the field has the right to plant it. You might have a right to stand there, but he's got a right to plant it. Okay, Tanitua. Hachitzon zoret derech. Amalei midami. Hasam leislei pseida lilokeach. Avol islei pseida lilokeach. Amalei mitanfi peri. So here he says, no, 1 minute here, you want to go ahead and plant, okay, it's not going to hurt me. I'll walk over your plants or whatever, okay? I mean, so you're taking a risk that maybe you're asking me to try to be careful or whatever it is, but your planting here doesn't compromise my right of access, okay? The same here. It was never a question that according to Rabbi Akiva that you have a derech that I can go ahead and plant this, and maybe you try to be careful about it or whatever, but my planting doesn't compromise. But here, if I plant directly over here, what's going to happen is your apples or whatever they are, your figs as they fall off the tree, are going to fall onto my tomatoes.
Well, that would be good. It'll cushion the fall.
Yeah, but it doesn't work that way. Figs fall to anyway. According to the Gemara, it's a concern that that'll actually hurt the stuff of mine that's falling off the tree. So the Gemara is not debating in the principle. The principle, you're right. Obviously, this space belongs to the owner of the field, not the owner of the trees. But does he have a right to plant it if it actually compromises to some degree the reason we're giving the owner of the trees access? Now, it's funny because the fundamental reason we're giving the owner of the trees access is to let him pick from the trees. And now we're shifting it. We're not saying that have planting here prevents him from picking from the trees, right? That would be one thing. It would compromise the fundamental right that we're giving him. We're saying planting here, could hurt the fruit that's falling, which is like a completely different concern. But anyway, that's what it's saying. So it's not necessarily, even though it's fundamentally owned by the owner of the field, it's not necessarily true that he has a right to plant it. So our case is similar to this case here about the 2 gardens to the end of it. What's the end of that Mishnah? If that basically if Beis Din assigns a particular path, or they agree on a particular path, then neither is allowed to plant it. Why? Because then it's more like this middle guy also has a partial ownership in the path. It was something we agreed upon. It wasn't that it was imposed on you, my right to access. And therefore, because it was somehow agreed upon, it's seen as a little bit mine as well, or, something that you gave me more explicitly those rights, and therefore you can't plant it. So it's a loose analogy, but here too the argument is that because of this sort of is something that is either you could say because it's like implicit with this sale, this sort of comes, but it really seems that the Gemara's bigger argument is that by you planting it would compromise my right. So since it would compromise my right, therefore neither of us have a right to plant that space. Okay, which is really doesn't to me seem totally fair to the Baal Hasadeh, but that's basically the argument. Okay, so anyway, so 1 minute. Right. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. So okay, so now we move on. So that was one point. That the space outside of here is based on Rabbi Akiva, is based on the same right of access. And even though you don't really own the space, it's only a right to pick, because in order not to compromise that right, we have to leave that space unplanted. Even the owner of the field has to leave that space unplanted. Okay, now the Gemara asks another question. So now that we said 3 trees gives you, this is huge, right? If you have 3 trees, you get all that space, all that land. How much is the distance between the trees? And we're assuming that there's both a minimum and a maximum. That if they're too close together, then it's basically like a forest. They're not really like trees that are there for, harvesting or whatever. And or another way of framing it is that then you're probably going to uproot some of the trees. But anyway, but they're not, and if they're too close, then and if they're too far apart, they're not connected to one another. So what is the right amount, the minimum and the maximum, that makes them far enough apart that it's like a meaningful to say you have land here that you want to be, tending to underneath the tree, and it's a tree, and it's not like a forest type of a copse of trees, and not so far that they're not considered disconnected. So v'chamiyeh beinehem Rav Yosef Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Arba Avad Shmona. From 4 amos till 8. Now we're going to discuss later where do you measure it from. Do you measure it from the canopy? Do you measure it from the root, from the base? So we'll get to that later. Okay, but between 4 to 8 amot, which is whatever it is, 6 to 12 feet. Rava Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel Mishmona Yad Sheishes. No, from 8 amot to 16 amot. Amalei Abayel Rav Yosef, which means you could be getting a lot of land. Amalei Abayel Rav Yosef, well, tivlog alei Rav Nachman. Don't argue with Rav Nachman. Now, it's funny that Abaye says it's Rav Yosef because Abaye was a Talmud of Rav Yosef, right? It sounds like he's talking to him as an equal. The Rashbam sort of says, because there's also story that Rav Yosef, when he got old, forgot his learning. Exactly. So Abaye could be sort of like reminding him, you really, you might forget what you taught about this. You shouldn't be arguing on Rav Nachman. Now, why? Which one was Rav Nachman? Rav Nachman was the one that said the bigger one, 8 to 16. That our Mishnah actually supports Rav Nachman, the idea between 8 and 16, or at least part of that idea, that up to 16 amot they're considered connected, more than 16 amot they're disconnected, right? So that's the upper limit of it. Okay, now we're going to have a kilayim case. Anodeas karmo sheishes rei amal sheishes rei amal. If you're planting your vineyard, and the rows are 16 amot separate from one another. The basic halacha is that when your rows are within a certain space, close enough that it's considered connected to one another, and it's basically like 2 rows, it's shtayim keneged shtayim be'echad yotzei zanav. They sort of look like this. Don't ask me why. Okay, but anyway, that's shtayim keneged shtayim be'echad yotzei zanav. So if they're within a certain space of one another, it's all considered a kerem. Then it's considered not just a vine, not just rows, but a vineyard.
It's like an outlet.
And if it's what?
Like an
outlet. And if it's a vineyard, then you can't plant a seed like a vegetable seed or whatever, a wheat seed in the vicinity. You have to be very far away. However, if it's just a single row, then it's enough to be just like 3 tfachim away or maybe 6 tfachim away. Okay, but anyway, if it's a single row, but if it's a vineyard, you have to be very distant. All right. So here the question is, how close do these have to be that they're looked at as together in order to make them into a vineyard? Okay. So Carmo, if they're 16 amot apart, these rows, then you can plant a seed right next to it, right up to it. Not like literally, it might be like 3 to 6 tvachim, but anyway, but it can be pretty close to each row. It's not a vineyard. So you see what? You see that up to 16 amot, they're considered connected. It's a cohesive unit. More than 16 amot, they're disconnected. So that proves that the upper limit is 16 amot. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, so now Rabbi Yehuda, this is the end of the Mishnah, said, Masa b'tzamon, there was a story in this place, Tzamon, that the rows were 16 amot apart. He turned literally the hair, but it basically means the hanging. If you think about it, like long locks of hair, it's like the hanging of the vines inward. So basically, what he did was the following. Okay, he has here. They're 16 amot apart from their base. Okay, but now the vines sort of they overhang, right? Right, whatever, they sort of hang on both sides. You consider the line to be the root, okay? So, here they were. What he did was, he would come one year, and he would take all of the vines that were hanging on that side, and all of the vines that were hanging on that side, we'll use a different color, and he would turn them inwards, okay? That's what he would do on 1 year. Leaving this space completely open 16 amot. And since they were 16 amot here with nothing in the middle, then these were considered to be separate rows, not part of the same vineyard, right? And since it was not part of the same vineyard, he was able to now plant this entire 16 amot with some type of something else, with some type of wheat or with vegetables or whatever it might be. Because this is a vineyard, these are close together, but now you've got a big open gap here, right? Because here, he did the same thing here.
Exactly.
And he kept on doing that. So he would open up these gaps of 16 amot. And that allowed him to then plant that middle space. Okay, and then what would he do the next year? The next year, he would flip it, right? So the next year, he took all of this, and he flipped that in, and that opened up this gap.
Right.
Okay, so he would, in alternate years, he would open up these gaps and let him plant in the totally open space. All right, so let's read that. The hair, well, like the overhang here, into the middle. And he would then plant the what do you call it? The
uncultivated.
Uncultivated, right? What do you say? What word? Furrow. No, near is like uncultivated land, or land that you turn over without planting. But he would plant it because it had been near from the year before. But and then in the other year, then he would flip it, and then he would plant this place. So it's fun. It's weird that 1 year he calls it near, and 1 year he calls it bore. But anyway, because I think near is when you overturn the soil and you don't plant, and bore is when you just leave the soil untended. But anyway, regardless, okay.
Bore is a tellem.
What?
Oh, tellem.
Bore is a tellem?
No.
Anyway, so that's what he would do. But the point being that once you had 16 amot totally open, then this was not considered part of the keren, and therefore he was able to plant it. Okay? And they permitted it. So anyway, here you have a story that the Mishnah Paskin 16 amot, the case supports that. So you see up to 16 amot, up to but not including, is considered connected. 16 amot and more is considered disconnected. Okay? Amalei, so he said to him, what, did I not draw the right picture?
No, I was just saying they have a diagram.
All right. Amalei, he said to him, Ana lo yadana. So Rav Yosef said back to Abai, I don't know what to tell you about that Mishnah. Ella uvda have, but I do know a story, a different story. Here's my story. Bedura dir Usa, top of Piglam Lamed Aleph, in this place, which is apparently the Kfar Roim.
So is like Mador, right?
I guess, right, like a village of shepherds. Also, came to Rav Yehuda. Go ahead and give him like the fill of the cattle and its vessels, which, as we're going to see, gets it basically is 4 amot. So the what do you call it? So the way the Rashbam reads this is is that there was basically, it was, as opposed to the 8 to 16, which we said before, here the space between them was between 4 and 8 amot, which is the other opinion. And Malo Bakar V'Kelav is considered to be 4 amot. So basically, Rav Yehuda was saying, oh, is there 4 amot between them? If there's 4 amot between the trees, then that's considered to be connected. So presumably, now here's the other thing we have to assume. We're going to have to assume, because we're only dealing sometimes with one of these endpoints, that there's a 4 to 8 opinion and an 8 to 16 opinion. So we supported the 8 to 16 opinion because of this thing that the upper limit was 16. That supported the upper limit, so presumably that supports the whole idea of that range.
Well, you don't know.
Okay, well, you don't know, but that's the argument. You could obviously sort of have a third many other possibilities. Similarly here, he said, oh, I know this case in this village of shepherds that there was 4 amot between the trees, and they said, give them the land. So presumably, because it was this end point of this range, it includes the other end point as well. But neither of these proofs are proving both halves of the range. Okay, but anyway, that's what Rav Yosef said back. I know this story that he said that Rav Yehuda said if there was 4 amot, give them the land.
I find it interesting he said Bakar and Kalav because the Shabbos we have the 2 Bakars.
Yeah,
and then the city.
That's true too. Yeah, well, that's 2 and 2, whatever. But that works actually because it's 4 times 4, 16. Okay, okay. Now he says V'lo ava yadana kamala Bakar v'Kelav kaman. I didn't know how much that was, how much space that was. Kevan de Shamisa lahadit nan. I heard this Mishnah. Lo yita adam ilan. Don't plant a tree right next to the boundary line of your friend's field, because then the overhang and the roots are going to draw from the nutrients, and the overhang will damage his the shade and damage his field unless you have 4 amot away from the boundary line. That's the amount of space you normally need to be sort of moving with your cow. Now, again, how do we know avodas hakerem is bakar v'chela? But that's what we assume, that avodas hakerem to sort of tend, have the cow go or the ox go with the plow or whatever to tend to the field is 4 amot. So avodah hakerem is 4 amot. That's the space you need outside of the vineyard to tend to the vineyard, and presumably in order to have your cow move with the kelav. So Amina, I said that it's 4 amot. So anyway, we have one Mishnah here in Kilayim that supports the idea that 16 amot, up to 16 amot is connected. More than 16 amot is disconnected. The 16 as the upper limit, and then we have this psak of Rabbi Yehuda as the 4 of the lower limit. Okay, that he says as long as there's 4 amot, then you give him the land. So, so now the Gemara says like this. Rabbi Yosef Milo Tanan. Now, why did Rabbi Yosef? Why did he respond to Abaye? Abaye quoted a Mishnah, and he responded with this story. Why didn't he? We have a Mishnah that supports Rav Yosef. What's the Mishnah? A different Tanaitic position, not the first one of 16. But here's what the Mishnah says in Kilayim. Reb Meir v'Reb Shimon Omrim, Hanoteas kamo shmona amot al shmona mutar la vizer l'sham. That they basically say, no, it's not 16 as the upper limit. It's 8 as the upper limit. Up to 8, it's 1 keren. More than 8, it's a different keren. So they have 8. So why did Rav Yosef run to this story with Rav Yehuda? Just say, you're quoting me the Mishnah in Kilayim that's 16 amot. There's other opinions in that Mishnah that are 8 amot. So the Gemara says, no, afilu hachi maaseh adif. Nevertheless, a story is better than because it's a psak l'maaseh. It's not just a theoretical opinion. And anyway, in that Mishnah, you don't know who to paskin like. Do you paskin 16 or do you paskin 8? So quoting the opinion of 8 would have said, hey, I'm not out of bounds. There's another opinion that I'm consistent with. But quoting a story actually gives weight to that position. Okay, now, of course, the Mishnah also had a story, right? The story with this, with flipping the vines. Okay, but this was maybe a more contemporary story. Okay, like you go more by the later generations. Okay, so we'd rather quote that story. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Now, where are we? Now, the Rashbam says that the story is actually a little bit different, that there are 2 stories here. So the Rashbam says, Afilu hachi masa de tzamon rav, v'hilkach amr le'abaye lo tiflag alei Rav Nachman, the masa hashanim b'mishnah misayeya, v'yimishne ikar tvei mehach to Reb Shimon. So the Gemara says, he reads a little different. Not why did Rav Yosef go to the story of Rav Yehuda, but it's more like why did Abaye ask from the Mishnah on Rav Yosef that there was an opinion of 16, since there was another opinion in the Mishnah of 8. So what made Abaye's question a good question? Not what was Rav Yosef's answer, but what made Abaye's question a good question. And the answer is that Abaye's question was a good one because the position of 16 was supported by the story in the Mishnah. Okay, so you could read it either that one way or another. Either Rabbi's question was of siding with the 16 was a strong position because it had the story, and Rav Yosef's answer also he wanted to answer himself with a story to strengthen his position. Okay, so it's very interesting about the difference between a theoretical position and a practical psak. So now the Gemara says like this. So for Rav Yosef, according to Rabbi Shimon, we know the idea of how separate they can be. 8 amot, that was the Mishnah in Kilayim. Up to 8 amot, they're considered connected. More than 8 amot, they're separate. That's mifuzarim. And shaminon leiritzufin. And we also know how close they can be before they're so close that they're not considered to create a space between them. Now, mifuzarin had the amrin. Mifuzarin was the Mishnah in Kilayim. We said that he says 8 amot, they're already separate. Ritzufin ditnan. Now, how do we know the lower limit, the 4 limit? Kerem anatua apachos me'arbamos eno kerem diva Rabbi Shimon. There you go. So you have the lower limit from it as well. If the vines are too close together, then that's not a real way a vineyard works. There's not enough space between them, so that doesn't create a vineyard. Kerem, it still is a vineyard. No, you look at the extra vines there as like you're going to uproot them. But that doesn't make the whole thing. You don't say, oh, you have all these vines compressed. I don't know what's going on here, but it ain't a vineyard. You say, no, it's a vineyard with some extra vines planted. And we're going to have to uproot the extra ones. Okay, but nevertheless, what you see is exactly for Reb Shimon, it's a perfect model. You've got 8 as the upper limit. More than 8, they're separate. They're not part of the vineyard. Closer than 4, they also don't create a normal type of a space of a vineyard. So that can exactly be applied to our case of the trees.
I'm sorry, how many if there's extra vines, and how do you have a kerem left if you uproot them all?
No, you uproot alternate ones. You don't uproot them all.
All within 4 amot?
What?
All within 4 amot?
No, like if you have like 3 vines, these are all 2 amot apart, okay? It's a kerem because what you do is you just uproot every other one.
You still have to have a minimum number of 5, right?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So
if you have more than 5, you uproot the other one.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Gemara says like this. Okay. So now we've got within Rabbi Shimon a perfect model for the smaller range. 4 they have to be at least 4 apart and up to 8 apart. It's exactly what he says by Kara. So the Gemara says, okay, El Rav Nachman Alibi Rabbanan Mifuzarim Shaminan Le. But for Rav Nachman, we got the upper limit 16. Right, that's based on this whole psak in this story. That 16, more than 16 or more is considered separate. But ritzufin mishminale. How do you know? Where did you infer the idea that the lower limit for him is 8 amot, and that within 8 it's considered too compressed? It says no. Svara, that we just learned from Svara. Midil Reb Shimon palga. Since Reb Shimon, the lower limit is half of the upper limit. The Rabbananami palga for the rabbis as well. Okay, so within a kilayim we have this position, the 8 to 4 position. This is Reb Shimon in kilayim. This is the Rabbanan in kilayim, the 16, and therefore we infer that the lower limit would be the 8. And then we apply and then we apply the range of kilayim to the same range of for the trees. So now the Gemara says, let's take a look at the halacha. Mike will be happy because now we're going to have halacha. We'll debate in halacha, but at least a discussion of halacha. Okay. So the Gemara says like this. Amar Rava, Hilchasa me arba amos v'atsheshes. Actually, not debated. It's just one line. Okay, Hilchasa me arba amos v'atsheshes. So he actually says, no, it's not that it's half. Maybe 4 is an agreed upon lower number. Okay, everybody agrees that too compressed is defined by within 4. That's all. That's clear, right? Because it makes sense also that the lower limit is agreed upon. That there's a minimum amount of space that you need in order to tend to the vines between and give them space to grow. So everybody agrees that 4 is the lower limit, and more than 4 is too compressed. The question is, what's the upper limit? Is it 8 or 16? So I'm going to pass them like the Rabbanan, that it's 16. I'm going to assume everybody agrees 4, and I'm going to go like the Rabbanan that says the upper limit is 16, and therefore that would be the range within Kilayim. Too close, it's less than 4, it's not considered like a normal vineyard. Too far away, they're separate vineyards. And the same by the trees.
That's just the
okay? What?
Just taking the chumras of both sides.
Yeah, but by this halacha, it's not a question of, that's true in Kilayim, but by this halacha, it's not a question of chumrah. This halacha, it's a kula to the purchaser. Anything between 4 and 16, we assume the land goes to the purchaser. Now, the funny thing, of course, is the assumption, there's two assumptions, not just that laws of Kilayim can be applied to these laws, which you could sort of understand. We're sort of conceptualizing, is it considered to be, one sort of plot or not, one group of trees, but also that vines and trees can be applied, especially when you think about the issue of the lower limits, right? The upper limit maybe is a more conceptual question. How far apart do you view them as separate units? But the lower limit seems to be more of an agricultural question. How much too compressed does it sort of compromise the growth and so on? I would think so too. Okay, so it's interesting that we're sort of applying that. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this.
Just on that point.
Yeah.
If you eat a grape, what bracha do you make?
I understand.
So it's a tree. Consider
that's what I'm saying. Conceptually, I can understand comparing them, but agriculturally,
that was your point.
Agriculturally, just because vines need less than 4 amos, they can't grow well. But once it's 4 amos, they can grow okay. Okay, it doesn't mean that trees can grow well if they're planted within 4 amos.
Some trees.
Well, some may. Okay, so maybe it depends. I'm just saying the assumption that you can do an immediate translation and application is interesting. Okay, tiny kavasi Rav, we talk like Rava. Presumably, this is in the context of our trees. How close can they be? And whereas the lower limit, closer than this, you wouldn't get the land, up to 4 amot. The kamayu meruchakim, how far away can they be and you get the land? Sheshis rei, 60. But more than that, you wouldn't. Hareze kanakarka, if then you get the land, veta ilanot shebenehem. Now, the trees between them. Now, you should be saying, what do you mean the trees between them? If there's trees between them, then there's not 4 amot between each tree. But it means they are like somehow very young and minor trees. They're not substantial enough to redefine the question of the space between the trees. So if there are these like shoots and other types of minor trees, you would get them. If in that case you own the land, and that ownership of the land continues even after the tree has died. If the tree dries up or is cut down, you still own the land. You really own the land. Okay. If they're closer than 4 amos together, or more than 6 or 16 or more amos apart, you bought them sequentially. So if you bought them sequentially, you don't get the land. It's only because when you buy them as a unit, it's considered to be that you're purchasing the land with them. In these cases, you don't get the land, and not the minor trees between them. If the tree dried up or was cut down, then you do not have the land. Okay. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, now Rabbi Yirmiyah. This is a very concrete, type of daf we have today. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, kashu moded, mimakam katsaru moded, or mimakam rachavu moded. Where do you measure? Now, there's two ways. The Rashbam says the question is like the 4 to 16. This is not a kula or a chumrah, because it depends whether you're working at the low end of the limit or the high end of the limit. But anyway, do you measure from the wide part of the trunk, or do you measure from the narrow part of the trunk, right? So where do you measure? The top of the trunk or the bottom of the trunk? So Rashbam also suggests an opinion that says the makam rachav is actually the canopy. Okay, you measure between the canopies. But he doesn't like that. Okay, probably because when we're looking about space, we're looking about where they're planted. Also, it would be hard, I imagine, to sometimes measure that canopy. So he assumes we're measuring from the trunk. And the question is from the base of the trunk or from the narrow from the top of the trunk.
Again, so if I buy trees as a unit, and they are more than 4 but less than 16 amot apart from each other.
Yeah, there are 3 of them. You get all the land.
I get all the land.
Yeah, the land between them, right? But presumably, once they're within this, you not only get the land between their trunks. This is why it's a little confusing what we're talking about here. But you also get, based on what the earlier Gemara, the land that extends to the degree of their overhang. That's what it sounds like.
From Yomi is asking you talking about.
No, Yomi is asking where do you measure the 4 to 16?
Yeah.
But once they're within the right range,
right,
not only do you get the land between the trunks, based on the earlier Gemara, it sounds pretty clear that you also get the land that
you get the overhang.
The overhang as well.
So is that, maybe we asked this, but like the overhang with the canopy, it keeps extending.
Right, that's why the Mishnah says that the guy can tell you to cut it, because now it's going outside of your property line.
So the
if
property
it
line
ex-
is, I guess this was obvious, but the property line is then defined at the point of the canopy when I bought it.
correct.
Okay.
And that's why the Mishnah says that if it continues to grow, he can tell you to trim it.
Right, okay.
Okay, but where do you now measure the 4 to 16? From the wide part of the trunk or the narrow part of the trunk? So, okay. Amalei Rav Gavia mi Beikatia l'Rav Ashi Toshma come in here. None. Harakuva shebegefen. Now, what does rakuva here mean? So the Rashbam says it means like harkava, which means like grafting. But Tosa says that that's irrelevant to this discussion. So he says it means like arkuva, which is what's your arkuva? Your knee or your no? Is it arkuva knee in Talmudic? No.
Okay.
I thought so. Okay, I guess it's not a modern Hebrew word. What's the modern Hebrew word for knee?
Your ankle.
Ankle? Oh, Barra.
I thought it was your ankle.
It's your ankle? Okay, anyway. Okay, so here, let me see if Google knows the answer to that. Well then.
Berach is the Shula's ankle.
There's an arkuva, it's a pencil sharpener.
Akev is a heel.
Okay, yeah, I think it says Himilan your defet the berach. Your berach is what?
Your knee.
Your knee. That's what I thought. Okay, so So anyway, he says. So Tosa says it means knee. Okay, so he says like this. So what does that mean? So if you look 3 lines down and Tosa's in the wide lines, v'nira arkuva hainu habracha habirka ka'adama korea al birkav. The king Korina Geffen be'aretz kishuzakein harbe mechasinos abakarka. So basically, what Tosa says is you sort of bend it at the knee, as it were, and what you do is, if you have your vine here, okay, yeah.
Can you draw it higher?
Yeah, I can draw it higher. I'm not sure I can draw it more accurately, but I can draw it higher. Okay, so if you've got your vine growing here, okay, you bend it at the knee, and then you have it come back up. Okay, so you sort of make it kneel, as it were, and you put that part underground, and then this other vine, so this vine here comes up over ground, and that sort of becomes like a separate vine. You just bend it down, and then it comes back up, and you bend it, you cover it with dirt, and it becomes like a separate vine. Okay,
It's like mavriach.
right,
It was a mavriach.
right, but not mavrich, not to graft.
Right.
So it's arkuva, okay? So kashmat anan harakuva shebegefen ain't a moded elam ikar hasheni. So therefore, now, so the point is that you now want to go decide this question about the 4 to 16 or the 8 to 16. Okay, so you measure from here it comes back up from the ground. Okay, so you measure, you consider this like one big vine or 2 separate vines for this whole Geffen question. So you go, this is sort of where, this is where it comes up from the ground here. What did it say? What did it call that? The Ikar HaSheni, from this point to this point. So I guess if it looks like this, try again. Okay, so here, here's where this one starts growing, okay? Then it like bends down, it goes below ground, and then it comes up over here. So now, see that? I didn't show you what's underground, so it makes it, so it's more. So anyway, you measure the 4 to 16 from this second root, right? Ikar Hasheni, where it's sort of coming up again, okay, and you measure it to here. That's like your question about your 4 or 8 or 16. But the point is, the key for Tosfos is the word Ikar. You're doing it from the root, the base. So you measure from the base. And if you measure here from the base, you're going to measure here from the base. You're going to measure from the wide point. That's the way Tosfos reads it. The Rashbam says the word Ikar Hasheni does not mean 1, 2, but it means the thing itself coming up has 2 knobs. The vines have like knobs, right? So he says it means the second knob. And from there he learns that the answer is not the bottom and not the top, but the middle. So the Rashbam understands the conclusion of the Gemara is the middle. But Tosa says it means no. The root here is second to this, but it really means the root, Ikar. And therefore it says if you measure from the base. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, here's a more classic Rabbi Yirmiyah question. let's say somebody sells to somebody 3 badei ilan. Let me just double check the Rashbam to remind myself how he explains this. Yeah. So here's the case, just like this case, except with a tree. Basically, what I do is, okay, here's the land. I'm going to sell Michal there my tree, but my one tree on this land, one branch, is sort of, here's the basic tree or whatever, but one branch has come down and then it's come back up again and grown another tree. And then from this tree, a branch has come down and grown up and come another tree. So basically, I've got like 3 trees, okay? They look like 3 trees, but basically, they're all coming from one tree. They're all like outgrowths of this one tree, and they're all still connected. Nobody's cut them. So does that count as 3 trees or 1 tree for this question of getting the land, okay? So, by Rabbi Yomi, where are we? Machalo shlosha badei ilan ma'u. Amalei Rav Gavia midei Kasil Rav Ashi tashma kamniyat nan hamavrich gimel gefanim v'ikrehen nirin Rabbi Eliezer v'ikrehen nirin. So now you are again for Tosos. This would be the word mavrich, not again as to what do you call it? As to graft, but again it's a sort of berach that you do exactly this with the vine. What we're talking about. Okay, so you have the vine go up and down, and it comes out as 3 separate vines. So how does that count for this issue of the vineyard? Is it 3 vines or 1 vine? Okay, v'krehan nirin, and you see the roots. So Rabbi Eliezer Reb Tzadok Omer, im yesh b'nei me'arba masvad shmoneh mitztarfin v'lavein mitztarfin. So if there's so ikrehan nirin says the Rashbam means that they've taken root. So the vine has not only in the case of the vine, not only, if we draw a vine here, not only is it passed underground, but it's actually taken root underground, and then it comes back up. So he would say those would actually be separate vines. So the same way there, he says that when you do that with vines, if they're taking root underground, they become separate vines, even though they're all connected. So here too, even though all these trees are connected, they would be considered to be separate trees. All right? People got the idea, basically? Underground, it's all connected, but it's taking root underground. So even though it all came and it's still sort of somehow connected to this original tree or connected to this original line, they are considered to be separate. Let me just double check the Rashbam here. Okay. Yeah. Okay, fine. So now the Gemara says like this. Okay. Mitzdarfin, we love mitzdarfin. By Rav Papa. So now Rav Papa asked. Right. Okay. By Rabbi Papa, if Papa asked, Machalo shnayim b'toch sadehu ve'echad al hametzar mahu. All right. So now let's go. So that's about, do you count these as 1 or as 3? And we said we count them as 3 if they've taken root underground. Now we're going to get back to, so we know it's between 4 to 16. What have we sort of established? The range is 4 to 16. You measure from the base, at least that's the way Tosa says it. Rashbam says you measure from the middle, okay? And even if they're connected underground, they're considered separate trees. Okay, those are things we've established. Now we want to know, here it was, I sold you, I've got this big field, okay? I sell you these trees. And this third tree here, which is within 16 amot, okay? But these are like in the middle of the field. And this third tree, which is within 16 amot, is right here at the edge of the field, okay? So because it's at the edge, you might somehow think, well, it's not considered part of that unit. It's standing all the way there at the edge. Maybe it's, I don't know, somebody.
Is it on the 16 mark?
It's within the 16.
I thought I understood to be on the 16 mark.
No, it's just because it's at the edge of the field, Meitzar. Okay, if you look at the Rashbam, Mihav Yahaflug of Lo Mitzar, Lo Dami Listeha Ilan, Lo Kana Karko, Makana. The whole point here is that when it's here, you sort of look at it as its own little field. But something that's way here at the edge, even though just distance-wise it's within, maybe that sort of stands by itself.
Because visually, it doesn't make the impression of a...
Something like that. I don't understand the question so much, but something like that. So he says, Mahu, so we don't know the answer. Now, but although there, you'd be inclined to say it would be. But now here's a more interesting question. Shnayim b'toch shelo, ve'echad b'toch shel chaveiro. My. Let's say, actually, okay, now I'm still selling my tree. This is the boundary line, okay? That's the boundary line. And now here's where Michal's field starts. But within Michal's field, I own one little tree in her field, okay? And enough, I guess, that it could create a continuous plot of land, okay? So, and I sell these two in mine and that one in hers. And I guess if you were to connect it, you could actually get a continuous plot of land. Okay, is the fact that it fundamentally is in Michal's field mean that you don't view this as one unit, and therefore you don't get the land? And the Gemara ends with take it. Okay, let's do another question. By Rav Ashi, Bor Mausha Tafsik. All right, let's say they're all now in this land, but right in the middle here of them, you've got a well. Okay, so do we say that well means you don't view this as like some, that sort of like interferes, and it's not one continuous plot of land? I mean, anything, it's a nice plot of land. You got a well right in the middle, okay? But maybe that wasn't the way it would work. You would have wells off to the side of where your planting would be. Like if you imagine a wheat field, you don't have a well in the middle of a wheat field, okay? You have a well off at the edge somewhere. So if you've got a well here, maybe that conceptually breaks it, and it's not considered one continuous unit, okay? Or let's say a well maybe is contained within, but let's say it's not just a well. Let's say it's actually, right, it's an aqueduct that literally cuts, we'll get rid of this access thing here. It's an aqueduct that literally like cuts through, right? So that really interrupts the whole, separates the whole unit. Okay, Ma'u Shetafsik. Rishus Rabbi Ma'u. How about if you've got a path, a public path going through?
Yeah, major deep.
I'm going to sell you three trees in Central Park. Two on one side of this, they have those nice paths with the trees on the side. So you two on one side, one on the other. So you get the path in the middle. Okay. Richva dedikli Ma'u Ma'u. How about if you got a little copse of like palm trees? Okay, which also are seen as like some, create some, not just small little trees growing between. Take, we don't know. So he'll ask him, let's say, the way the initial question was, after you bought the three trees, a cedar tree popped up in them. So the Gemara says, what type of question is that? A cedar tree grew after you bought the three trees, and it's already your land. It grew in your land. So here, let's say you had a cedar tree, right? So it's not a small little tree. It's this big cedar tree. Does that interrupt? And it's considered that you can't say you've got these you got a huge cedar tree growing in the middle of these three. Is that also make it like not one unit?
Wait, is a cedar, I don't know, symbolic or stands for non-fruit?
Oh, I just thought it meant because the cedar tree was big. But maybe you're right. I don't know what the range of that question is. I don't know. I mean, I thought it was because it was big, not just because it wasn't fruit. Anyway,
it's different. Like Ilan is different from Eres,
right?
Even though Ilan is some tree, but it's usually a fruit.
Maybe you're right. Maybe that makes it not part of the unit because it's conceptually distinct. Amalei kana v'kana. Here at least we have a resolution. You get the land, you get the tree. It's not a problem.
Again, am I missing? So Hillel is asking Rabbi. How does that work? Hillel. Can't be Hillel Zakein, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be a different Hillel
or something like that.
Yeah, it's got to be one of the later Hillels. It's also.
Isn't that striking?
It's also funny that after all of these Amoraim, Rav Ashi and Rav Yirmiyah, we have Hillel and Rebbe. When you have Boimine, I didn't even notice that, like a Tana,
right.
I don't know. That is funny. You're right.
It's just striking.
No, you're right. That definitely is. Okay. All right. Now,
Isaiah Levanon were considered to be sort of robust.
That's what I was saying. I thought it was because it was big. Okay. Now, I've been drawing all of these. Oh, there you go. Do they say something about Hillel and Rebbe? About how those are Tanayim? Okay. So now I've been drawing all of these, that they're in a nice little triangular, so that defines like a plot of land. But now the Gemara is going to ask that question. How are the three trees standing? Rav Amar Kashura, they're in a line. that even if you have them in a straight line, you would actually get, right, sort of like they're in a straight line, you'd actually get the land that's with them. Although it's, 3 trees in a line, it's harder to see that as creating a space than in a triangle. So Rav Amar Kishur, B'Shmuel Amar Kichatzuva. A chatzuva is basically like a type of a picture, or like a what do you so a kankan. So but basically it means like something like a tripod. You have something sitting on a tripod. What? That's what a chatzuva. What's a what?
Chatzuva is like a tripod.
Oh, chatzuva itself means a tripod. Okay, fine.
So it's a product canister supported by 3 legs.
Right. So the Trump says it's like the can that's on the tripod. But okay, one way or the other. Okay. So it's like a tripod, like we've been drawing it. Okay. So the Gemara says like this: if you say a row, and a row defines the land in between them, certainly if it's a triangle, you get the land in between them. But if you say only if it's a triangle, low, but not, in a row not. My timer. Now the Gemara, rather than saying my reason that conceptually it defines less like an area because they're in a row, it also says because then if I'm selling you these 3 trees in a row, the seller will still want the land between because I can plant in between them. Right? I can just have my plow go between them and plant in between them. So we're going to assume that I'm retaining that space for myself because that's still plantable land. But if I'm selling you these 3 trees, there's no convenient way I can like move my plow between them. So this land under here is not really so plantable by me anyway. So then we're assuming I sold it to you. So it's sort of going more with how usable it is to the seller. And if it's still fundamentally usable to the seller, he would not sell it. Rav Hamnuna asked, my time. So my time. So if you say the 3, then he gets it. Why does he get it? Because because the plant area in between can't really be efficiently planted. If that's true, let's say I sold him 3 like these very very thorny thorn bushes. Okay, so let's say you're saying that the determinant factor is, can the owner use the space between them? So let's say, and therefore here he can't, so you get the land. Here he can, so you don't get the land. Well, what if here, instead of trees, there were these big thorny thorn bushes that made it impossible to go between them because you get all scratched up? Would you say in that case he does get the land? Is that your one factor, whether the space can be used or not? So Amalei, no. Hanach lo chashivi. Hanach hashivi. No. In that case of the thorn bushes are not important enough to get land with them. You need both factors. Number one, you're selling trees. Trees, there's an argument because they're so important, you'll get land with it. But in addition to it being trees, it has to be that the land between is not plantable. And therefore, we assume the owner's okay with you having the land. So in this case, although you have trees, the land between them is plantable, and therefore you don't get the land. Here you have trees and the land is not plantable, and therefore you do get the land. Okay, so that is interesting that it reflects that the reason you're going to get the land is not just, it's always it's because there's an additional factor that the owner doesn't have such a need to hold on to the land in that case because he can't really use it so efficiently. All right, so with that, we're done with the 3 trees, and now we move on to another Mishnah. Let's take a look at this next Mishnah. Hamocher rosh behema gasal lo mocher taraglayim. If I'm selling David there, the head of my cow, okay, how many heads of cattle do you have? Right? You could say that a head of cattle means the whole cattle. But no, I'm selling you a head. It just means the head. There's actually a word for that in English where a part of something represents the whole. What's that word? Do you know that word?
Yes, it's called, is that
synecdoche? Synecdoche or something like that. Anyway, we definitely talk about
in rhetoric.
We definitely talk about heads of cattle, but here head literally means head. And therefore, not only do you not get the whole cattle, you don't even get the legs that come with it. That might sometimes be seen as being sold with it. If you sell the legs, you don't get the head.
Wait, you're not talking about a live.
I was just going to say.
Are you talking about a live animal or a dead animal?
Well, it might be alive when I sell it, but right. I mean, I might be selling it to you, and then we do the sale, and then I shecht it, but okay, yes, I'm basically selling it dead. Yes. Okay. Okay. Fine. Okay. If you sell the trachea. Now the trachea here represents not just the trachea but the lungs as well. So you're going selling the whole sort of breathing apparatus, the trachea and the lungs, but you don't get the liver. If you sell the liver, you don't get the lungs and the trachea. But if you're selling a small goat or a sheep, the head comes with, because maybe there's not so much meat on the head, so it's assumed to come with the legs. But they sell the legs, I mean, that's a lot of meat, so it's not assumed that you get the head with it. If you sell the trachea and the lungs, you also get the liver. Again, maybe because the trachea and the lungs there is not so significant. But if you sell the liver, you don't get the lungs and the trachea with it. Okay, so that's that. Now we get to a more conceptual, very important and conceptual part of the Mishnah. Really, a separate Mishnah. Arba midos b'mochim. There are 4 categories of transactions. Not in Arba midos b'mochim. You're thinking it's like it's going to say Omer shali shali v'shalcha, but that's not the Arba midos b'mochim. It really means there are 4 categories of transactions. It's not even of sellers. It means of transactions. What are the 4 categories of transactions? I sell David. I say, David, I'm selling you grade A wheat, and you take it home, $10 a barrel, whatever, a bushel. You take it home, and it's grade B. Okay. So now David can say, I want my money back. I want to do, you basically sold me something that was of a lower grade than we agreed upon. If it's, however, the opposite, I was telling you to sell this grade B, and accidentally I shipped you grade A. So I could say it was a mekach tos, okay, and that we're going to do a deduction. Now the key here is, you might think that if it's a mekach tos, okay, that it's both sides can be choser bo, because a mekach tos means it wasn't what we agreed upon. There wasn't a meeting of the minds. The whole sale is void from the outset. The answer is not that way. That it's more like, if it's a completely different thing. Let's say I was selling you a Toyota, and I delivered to you, a Jeep Wrangler, or who knows? I said I was selling you a Toyota and delivered to you a donkey. Okay, so in those cases, you could say right, and it's not just yachol, like maybe the whole sale is void from the outset. But in the cases where we're being off, the toast is not so radical, it's wrong, but it's not completely, of a different ballpark, then it's really like the one who was cheated, who got less, has the right to be choser. The other one does not have the right to be choser. So that would be like a relevant question. I go ahead and I sell this to David, and let's say David then uses I say good weed, and I give him bad. And he uses his bad weed, and he marries a woman with it, or he buys a lulav and an esrog with it. Is the woman married? Is he yotzei the mitzvah? Yes, because until he retracts it, the sale is still binding. Let's say now the prices have changed. If for whatever reason I want to go back, I'm not entitled to retract. It's only him that has a right to retract. So conceptually, you might think a mekach tos is void from the outset. What this Mishnah is telling you is that if you're in the general ballpark, it's binding until one side retracts, and only the side that was cheated, that lost out, has the right to retract. So the other side does not have the right to retract.
Very interesting. In other words, these are valid sales. These are inside this. It's not yet a mekach ta'ut.
Right.
Right? That's what you're saying.
Right.
So these midot are lending definition to the parameters
right.
of a valid sale that have discrepancies.
Right. That you have a right to retract. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So rosanim su ra'ot, yafot v'nim su yafot, if it was as promised, which is not much of a chiddush, but we needed to fill out our 4 possibilities. Okay. Did I skip one? No. So that's 3. That's not 4. Okay. So what's the 4th possibility? Shechamtit levana says shechamtit. If I said I was going to sell you red and it turned out to be white, or white and it turned out to be red, and there's not a clear better or worse. Some people want one, some people want the other. I said I was selling you black pepper and I sold you white pepper, or white pepper, I sold you black pepper, right? You wanted the green peppers and I sold you the red ones. Actually, red ones are definitely better than the green ones, but okay. Anyway, that's a question of preference. It's not a question of better or worse. So in that case, eitzin shel zayis v'nimtza shel shikma. If I was selling you olive wood and it turned out to be sycamore, so shikma v'nimtza shel zayis, yayin v'nimtza chometz, chometz v'nimtza yayin. Now you might think vinegar is definitely worse than wine, but I need vinegar in my house too. Okay, so in those types of cases where now it might be that vinegar costs less than wine, but nevertheless, it's a case of it's not clearly the same thing, but of lesser quality. It's a different thing, but not different like I said I was selling you wheat and I delivered apples. Okay, it was a different color and whatever. In those types of cases, we both have a right to be choser bo, because we could both say, hey, it wasn't what I thought I was selling, it wasn't what I thought I was buying, and so on. It was a different thing. But then, presumably, if neither of us opt to be choser, the sale is still binding. Okay,
is that great? Is a sugya where somebody wants silver and he's delivered gold, and he can because he needed silver,
right? I think
it's Machata 18.
Could be. All right. So anyway, we will pick up with this tomorrow and continue to look at this through the lens of ona'ah. Right? This is not really so much ona'ah. This is about mekach. If you might remember from what we learned about Metzia, ona'ah is when it was exactly as promised, but the price was wrong. I overcharged you or I undercharged you, right? People remember that from ona'ah? Yes. So there's sometimes I could have overcharged you so much that it leads to avoided sale. But that idea of how much am I charging, ona'ah, does that void the sale, is at least conceptually a different question from is it the object as promised or a different object as promised, which is what this is a focus on. Okay, so we will continue with this tomorrow.
Right, you ordered something